Yeah, so welcome everybody to this session on living evidence organized by the coordinating group on climate solutions. In the coordinating group on climate solutions, we really try to encourage high quality reviews on climate topics, on climate solutions to help informing decision making. Because it's really there's very little time left to solve this problem if we want to achieve what the global ambition is to keep warming to well below 2 degrees. We have 5 excellent presentations today from 4 excellent speakers that I will be introducing as they will be presenting. Just in terms of the housekeeping, some people may already know that there is we can't have a direct exchange in terms of questions. You need to use the live Q&A. So please start typing in questions as you watch the presentations, and then we will be discussing them at the end. Now, I don't want to take a lot of time, so I would like to introduce the first speaker. This is Denise Thomson from the University of Alberta. You may have already heard of her, not only for her work, but also as a co-founder and co-convener of the Cochrane Climate Change and Health Working Group. So she's a really important figure in terms of coordinating some of the global efforts, evidence synthesis efforts in this health space. And without further ado, over to you, Denise.
Great. Okay, thanks, Jan. And Carrie will be opening my presentation in a moment, which I can't see currently. But just while that's happening, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, where you are. I'm joining you from the lands currently known as Canada, but the land on which I stand has been a gathering place for many millennia, for many different people. And I'd like to acknowledge that long history. I am presenting twice this morning. The first presentation is listed in your schedule. It's the one on climate change and the whole health of older adults. I have had the great privilege of working. This work is a project of the Cochrane Climate Health Working Group, which is a part of Cochrane, formerly known as the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a sister organization for Campbell. And the Climate Health Working Group has been around for about 3 years now, and brings together people from many different countries around the world, some of whom have helped with, have collaborated on this project, and it has been a true collaboration. I'm very lucky to have worked with this wonderful, brilliant crowd. Carrie, I'm just, the slides for me are not in presenter view. I don't know if that matters, but if you could advance to the next slide, please. So great. So hopefully you can see that. You may or may not think of climate change as a health issue, but it makes sense when you think of climate change as basically, I think of the 21st century as a time of ongoing and intensifying climate change. So it makes sense that climate change would be affecting every aspect of life on Earth. So Carrie, if you don't mind moving to the second slide. Yeah, awesome, thank you. And so my focus in my PhD work and in my work with Cochrane, I should have mentioned I'm also a PhD student at the University of Alberta in Canada. The focus of this presentation is on the impact of climate change on human health and health systems, particularly the health of older adults, which we're defining as people aged 60 and up. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I don't have a lot of time for this presentation, but if you quickly scan it, you can see that the impacts on the health of older adults are very broad: mental, physical health, health systems, and the health of communities. And so the focus of this project is in really teasing out the breadth of those impacts. So next slide, please, Carrie. Great, thank you. So what we have done in our work is we're taking a social and ecological framework to drill down and explore the breadth of impacts. So we've looked first, so just to give you an overview, we're looking at the factors that create vulnerability, the factors creating resilience, and then in my last slide, I'll show some research and policy recommendations for decreasing vulnerability and enhancing resilience. And in our focus is on how research and policy can enhance healthy aging, which is defined by the WHO Health Organization. You'll see this at the bottom of the screen as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. So this is a very positive approach to healthy aging. So you'll see the layers of the social and ecological context. You'll have to excuse me, it's very early in the morning for me, and I clearly can't talk well yet. So we have the individual level, the microsystem level, which is in relationships such as family, friendships, mesosystem, which is your community, the local physical environment, local health system. And of course, it's at the local level that most people encounter health systems. Exosystem, which is your broader level of government, society, and so on, and then the macro system, which is even broader yet. So I don't have time to read all of the factors creating vulnerability. I will say these are not all of the factors that create vulnerability for older adults. We couldn't list them all in a slide and still have it be readable. But you'll see that there's the value, I think, of this framework in terms of really exploding out from the individual into broader and broader contexts, the number of experiences that for a person or for a community create vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. And so that can be anywhere from life course impacts at an individual level, and we're seeing in environmental health that environmental insults experienced early in childhood continue to reverberate through a person's lifetime. And then broadening out to the macro system at the highest level is a cultural or individual attachment to place, and many factors in between. So I'd better hurry up. If we could move to the next slide, please, Carrie. Great, thank you. So again, this is not a comprehensive overview of factors creating resilience, but I've put in some of the levels of the social ecology. And what we're doing there in seeing resilience is what promotes strength and the ability to rebound after shocks or overlapping shocks from climate change. Of course, climate change is a mix of immediate shocks, such as a wildfire, and broader, longer shocks, such as loss of connection to a place. So there's a lot going on simultaneously. And again, you see here that factors promoting resilience can range at an individual level, from individual health, hope, agency, coping style, and then broadening out as high as the macro system in terms of seeing connection to nature and desire to leave a legacy, which might inspire climate action, or community involvement, or so on. And next slide, please.
Just to say, Denise, you're tracking at 6.5 minutes at the moment.
Oh, okay. I will hurry up. So we see a number of research and policy opportunities in our group, and again, we're exploring those at these different levels. So I will say we are preparing a manuscript on this framework that will be submitted to the gerontologist. It's an invited manuscript, and we expect it to be, we will be submitting it in a few months. So if you're interested in this, that it will eventually appear in print. But our aim with this project really is to highlight to both the research and policy communities the importance of considering older adults in climate change research, in climate change, and in health policy making. And again, always with the view of promoting resilience in order to be able to promote healthy aging. And on my, if you don't mind, is just my contact information. So that's my personal email and personal Twitter, along with the website of the Climate Health Group for Cochrane, which you're more than welcome to join if you are so wish. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was excellent. Just to everybody in the room, we don't have the option to open your microphones. Therefore, if you have questions to Denise, please put them in the live Q&A chat. We don't have any questions yet. So I suggest that for the minute we will move on, but please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Denise will also be able to respond there, but we can also pick them up during Denise's second talk, because we will see her again. Looking forward to that. There is already one, so that one we can take. Did you have any theoretical underpinning for your work? Question by King Carl Toman Duho.
Hi. Deep theoretical underpinnings, no. I'd say our underpinnings are in that conception of healthy aging. And I guess there is social theory baked into the concept of the social and ecological framework in terms of, perhaps a sociological approach. But so it's baked into the assumptions around the value of a framework, but we as a group have not adopted an explicitly theoretical stance, no.
Thank you, Denise. And I suggest that we move on. If you have further questions to Denise, put them in the chat, and Denise will be able to respond there as well. Now it's my real pleasure to introduce Blanca Anton. She's a researcher in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she works in the Pathfinder initiatives that is exploring the healthy life in the context of zero carbon futures. A very exciting project, and she will be presenting case studies of health co-benefits. Over to you, Blanca. Really looking forward to this.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here. My name is Blanca Anton, and I'm a research assistant at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, working on the Pathfinder Initiative. The Pathfinder Initiative is a research project that synthesizes and assesses evidence on climate mitigation actions with health co-benefits. Some of you may have joined yesterday's session where my colleague Tamsin presented on the umbrella review of our project. I, on the other hand, will tell you a bit more about the case studies part of our research project, where we were looking for mitigation actions or policies that have health co-benefits. We were specifically looking for actions that were implemented in the real world and where evaluations of the impact on greenhouse gas reductions and benefits to human health existed. We screened...
Blanca, we can't see your screen at the moment.
Oh, that's weird.
Carrie, could you help us here?
Because it says I'm sharing at the moment.
Yeah.
Let me stop share.
Carrie, can you hear us?
Yes, try now.
Try
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
Can you see that now? Or is it not sharing?
I can't see on the main stage.
No, just 1 second.
Okay, then I'll stop share, because on my side it says I'm sharing my screen.
Maybe give Carrie a second. I think she needs to put you on the main stage.
Apologies for that.
Blanca, try sharing your screen now.
Yes.
You are on main stage.
Is it working now?
I don't see it. Yeah, now.
Yep.
Excellent.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's go.
Apologies for that. So basically the first slide was just the title slide. So yeah, we screened, published and grey literature and had an open call for submissions on our Pathfinder website and in the Lancet. We also identified case studies through our partner organizations, CDP and C40. And in total, we identified 33 case studies. We expected to find more evidence. However, it was very challenging to find implemented mitigation actions where the impact on both greenhouse gas emissions and on human health was evaluated. Our findings demonstrated that there's naturally greater need and potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in high-income countries. However, in low-income countries, we also saw potential for mitigation measures, which can reduce emissions while also providing substantial health benefits. I won't have time to go into great details today, and I can only present 2 examples, but please feel free to contact me if you're keen to learn more. The first example I will present today is an assessment of the effects of the renewable portfolio standards and the effects from increased use of solar and wind power in the United States, which replaced coal and natural gas-fired plants. The renewable portfolio standards are policies designed to increase the use of renewable energy sources for electricity generation. And by the time of the study, they were implemented in 29 states in the US. The studies showed that switching to renewable energy to meet these standards resulted in an almost 4% reduction in fossil fuel generation in the US. In 2015 alone, around 150 million metric tons of CO2 emissions, which is the equivalent to around 7% of the emissions from the energy sector, were avoided. Compliance with the standards also led to great reductions in air pollution, and it further reduced mortality and hospital admissions for respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. Between 2007 and 2015, the economic benefits of renewable energy power generation were significant and were estimated at between 30 to 100 billion US dollars. My next example, on the other hand, shows how mitigation actions in the energy sector can have benefits in low-income countries, especially to health. The case study shows the benefits of improved cook stoves in the Gambia, Senegal, and Guinea-Bissau, where in over 5,000 households, improved cook stoves were implemented. These cook stoves replaced traditional 3-stone fires and were primarily implemented to reduce indoor air pollution and improve health. The implementation resulted in reductions of around 3 tons CO2 equivalent per household per year. The installation of improved biomass cook stoves also resulted in large reductions in indoor air pollution, up to 60%. The intervention also decreased mortality and cases of respiratory infections among children. In addition, there was also a significant reduction in time spent to gather fuel wood and time spent cooking. The study showed great potential of improved cook stoves. However, the success of other implemented programs is mixed. This can be mainly attributed to, for example, low quality of cook stoves or an inappropriate implementation, which in turn could limit the acceptability of the cook stoves. We found that it is therefore very important to create context-specific interventions. I hope these examples gave you a better understanding of our work at the Pathfinder Initiative. Our findings demonstrated the need for transformational action, and our findings also showed that it is important to take unintended consequences into account and learn from unsuccessful interventions. We also found that there's a large data gap, and we need more robust data on implemented actions and their impacts on both greenhouse gas emissions and on human health. Most case studies we found only measured the effects on either greenhouse gas reductions or on impacts on human health, but not both combined. We therefore need more robust data to identify barriers and facilitators and actions with the biggest impact on the environment and human health. Thank you very much for joining today. It was a great pleasure for me, and feel free to contact me if you're keen to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Blanca. I'm not sure that we are letting you already off the hook here. So again, encouragement to everybody to put questions for Blanca into the live Q&A chat. From my myself, I would have a question related, just very basic understanding of what you think or how you think about transformational change. For me, it's always kind of difficult to wrap my head around this because, it's a concept you hear very often, but it's for me, it's not always easy to distinguish what transformational change exactly is.
Yeah.
How did you operationalize that?
I think, one example we found, for example, was a bike scheme in Buenos Aires. Great idea to both improve physical activity and reduce emissions by encouraging active travel instead of car use. However, we found that the emission reductions were very minimal of such bike scheme. So what we therefore suggest is a transformational change of the whole transport sector. So a bike scheme alone will not be sufficient to reach net zero. We need to transform the whole transport sector. We need more accessible public transport. We need behavioral change and change the car-dependent behavior of people. So that is what we mean by transformational change. I hope this makes it a bit more clear.
Excellent. Thank you so much for these explanations. They were really helpful to me. I don't see further questions, but I really encourage everybody to pose further questions to Blanca in the chat as we are moving on now with the program. Thank you, Blanca, for this. And next up is Tarun Khanna from MCC in Berlin, a colleague of mine. He is doing quite a lot of work into behavioral interventions in the energy and climate space. He will be presenting for us today on evidence ecosystems. Without further ado, over to you, Tarun.
Thank you, Jan. Just sharing my screen.
And everybody, keep the questions flowing in the chat. That will make it much more lively.
Great. So I hope you can all see my screen. Then I'll start my presentation. As Jan said, I'm working at the MCC as a postdoctoral researcher, and today I'm going to talk really about an idea that we have been developing, which is really called the evidence ecosystems for climate solutions. So why do we need, and I'll go in, the whole presentation is really about what evidence ecosystems are, so like, or review ecosystems are. So if you don't really, like, you're thinking, what is this? Just hold on. But I think I want to say something about the motivation, about how we came about this idea. So for us, we see systematic reviews as one of the fundamental tools in sort of policy formulation or policy. And as you're beginning, given we have such little time in making policies for climate solutions, we really need them to be based on hard evidence. This is slightly problematic, especially in the climate space, because high quality systematic reviews are somewhat not available. And when they are, they're very pertain to very specific areas and specific questions, which makes sense because, to be in depth, you need that. But with these really specific reviews, it's very hard to answer broader policy questions. So we think that one way to sort of overcome this problem is something known as, or what we call as, an ecosystem of review, or review ecosystem, which is essentially a set of interrelated systematic reviews for aggregating the evidence related to climate policies. So we really sort of think there are 4 key pillars on which these reviews should be based. So first of all, they should be systematic. So there should be detailed systematic reviews following the best guidelines. These reviews should go beyond a specific research question and be interrelated enough to answer a bigger policy question. But because they need to be answer a policy question, they need to necessarily be interrelated, and for that they need to be harmonized in the way they have been designed and implemented, and the way they view sort of the research landscape. And I'll explain more in a bit with an example. And lastly, we think any such review system would greatly benefit, while it's not critical, it would greatly benefit from being a set of living reviews, so that they can be constantly updated and the evidence is available when policymakers need it. Now I'm going to talk really about one example of this. So we are developing with some other collaborators. So this is an ecosystem of review for assessing the effectiveness of behavioral interventions in reducing carbon dioxide emissions of households. Why do we need this? Well, we have, general idea that in sectors across food, industry, transport, buildings, households are major player and carbon emitters. And we can use behavioral interventions to change their behavior such that we see some sort of carbon mitigation. But what is the global potential of all such behavioral change? And there are lots of sort of primary studies on this, so we can aggregate them. And sort of really to do this, what we want to do is do a series of high quality reviews across these different spaces, so across food, transport, buildings, and materials, focusing on one of these more specific topics. So for example, in buildings, it could be daily use activities of households in energy consumption, or purchase and use of efficient appliances and in households, or it could be something like actually changing the source of your energy consumption in your house completely to a rooftop panel or a renewable district heating system. And it obviously extends beyond just buildings, but this is sort of the example that I wanted to give you. In the end, the idea is to synthesize the evidence from the ecosystem of reviews into one cohesive whole. This would also, but the fact that we have these reviews which are sort of interrelated will allow for direct comparison between domains, unlike the current situation where it's really hard to compare results from different reviews because there's such different, for example, definitions. And this is sort of what we want, like, or we hope to achieve in the end, to have reviews across different domains and be able to sort of make sense of something about them. We also, apart from having a comprehensive sort of set of definitions and harmonizing that, we would also like to have a comprehensive set of risk of bias, so that the qualitative assessment of the different reviews is also interrelated and has some common ground. We would, of course, try and adjust for publication bias as well. Just to last mention that this is a joint effort between MCC, where Jan and I are based, and the University of Cambridge, and the Leibniz Institute for Economic Research in Germany. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to any questions and ideas.
Thank you, Tarun, for this excellent presentation. Again, please come forward with your questions in the chat. Blanca, there's still a question for you. Feel free to answer it and just also tick the box afterwards so that it's moved to the answered question section. Tarun, then maybe as questions are popping in, I fully understand your idea about review ecosystems, but can you reflect on maybe some of the challenges? Because it seems to me, if I could put it radically, that it could lead to some sort of inbreeding, right? So people, wanting to take over entire areas of research in terms of the review work that is carried out. Isn't it too top down as an approach rather than and wouldn't it be necessary that those reviews just come bottom up by different groups? Could you reflect a little bit on this?
I think that's a fair point. But it does depend on the way the architecture is developed, right? So especially when we're thinking about a living sort of review system, if we can design a system where researchers, as they do their research, feed into these reviews, then it really would, as you mentioned, transform into more of a bottom-up effort, where there's only maybe one coordinating group which synthesizes, but there are multiple people feeding into it. And I think the fact that we would at least want these reviews to be to adhere to the higher standards for open synthesis would necessarily at least ensure a level of transparency and replication. And I think that would be critical if we want this effort to remain open and easily editable.
Thank you for that. I'm sure there will be further questions coming up in the chat. Everybody keep the questions flowing. I would like to give a big hand to Tarun. Thank you for this really excellent presentation, and I would now move to the next scholar, who is Scholastica Akalibey, from the business school at the University of Ghana. And she will be talking about generic sector and specific activities of green economy. So Scholastica, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here. I think you are muted at the moment.
Thank you, everyone. Can I be heard now?
Yes, thank you.
And can you also see my screen? Like, am I sharing my slides?
Not yet.
Okay.
Maybe we need to Now they are. Now we can see them. If
Okay.
you go into presenter mode, then everything is perfect. Thank you.
Presenting mode. Is it okay? Can I start?
I mean, just in full screen mode. But it's also fine like this. Whatever works.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending this conference. I'm going to make good use of your time in the next 5 minutes by presenting to you the generic and then sector specific drivers of green economy, precisely from the Ghanaian context. So, I mean, basically, what is green economy? Green economy is an economy that seeks to reduce environmental risk, ecological scarcity, and to ensure a sustainable development. So, and it does that by integrating the social, the economic, and the environmental development. Aspects by being able to marry all these things, ensure a sustainable development growth. And in exploring the drivers of the green economy, two theories were used to underpin the studies, which is the institutional theory and the natural resource based view theory. The institutional theory, assesses formal and informal constraints, and it has three constraints that basically explains why, or the reasons why, organizations or countries do transition or change. And the first constraint has to do with a cohesive pressure or isomorphism, which basically indicates that economies or institutions do transition because of maybe an international regulation policy, something that is beyond the control of the country, that is, influencing the change, and then they can change. And the second pressure that the theory talks about is the mimetic isomorphism or pressure, which also indicates that countries do want to transition. Probably they want to transition to the green economy because they are other countries. They've seen other countries transitioning. So because of that, they also want to transition. With the intention of enjoying the benefit or the prospect of whatever the change comes with. And then the third constraint, which causes organizations or countries to change, is the normative isomorphism, which indicates that the change has become a norm, and so if it has become a norm, then we too want to transition. So they are transitioning based because the change has become a norm. All other countries are transitioning because of climate change, because we want to address the existing environmental problems. So these are the three isomorphisms the institutional theory presents that underpins their study. And the second theory that was used for the study was the natural resource based view theory, which presents three strategies or capabilities that explains the three reasons why firms or countries, in this case, because I'm talking about Ghana as a country, would like to change its ways of economic development. And that has to do with the sustainable development policies. And with the theory, it indicates firm stewardship. But in this case, I'm looking at the environment, so environmental stewardship. And then the last strategy or capability that the theory presents is the pollution prevention. So countries would want to transition to address issues of pollution prevention because of sustainable development and because of environmental stewardship. And in doing so, the methodology that was used was a qualitative methodology, and precisely it was the we used a structured interview guide, to have a face-to-face interview with a steady participant. And 19 participants were interviewed in all from 5 economic sectors that were considered the higher emitters when it comes to emissions in Ghana. And that has to do with the energy sector, the waste sector, the agricultural sector, the forestry sector, and the transport sector. So let's go to the findings of the study. So the study discovered that these sectors would like to transition their way of doing things, because they are interested in intergenerational well-being. Like, so they would want to transition to not to endanger the welfare of the future generation. So our respondents indicated we need to take into account the need to manage the resources we have sustainably in order to meet our needs today and that of the future generation. So they are transitioning because they want to preserve the welfare of the next generation. And the findings were, I beg your pardon, the findings were categorized into 2. That is the generic drivers and the sector-specific drivers. So the generic drivers basically refers to drivers that were made-mentioned and discussed by all the 5 sectors that were interviewed. They all made mention of these reasons or drivers of climate change. So I've explained the first one, which is the futuristic drive. And the second, reasons why these sectors would want to transition is because of climate change. And there are a lot of international policies and regulation at a global level, enforcing countries like mandatory, like let's take the Paris Agreement. Countries that have signed this agreement is required to change. So these policies and regulations at the global level is mandating the Ghanaian country like economy to also transition. So this can be related to the institutional theory when it comes to the cohesive isomorphism, and then environmental unfriendly development models. The respondents also indicated that we want to transition because the current models of development are not environmentally sustainable. Example, our policies, our technologies, our programs, our practices is not driving us to a sustainable development. Therefore, we would want to transition to a better development model like the green economy, which promises a sustainable policy, promises clean energy or technology, and then programs and practices. And the last generic drivers that were also mentioned was insufficient utilization. They also indicated that they realize it's as if resource is in abundance. So they do harvest resource like over harvesting, but they don't use the resources efficiently. So inefficient utilization of resources is one of the major concerns that the Ghanaian context would want to transition, so that when we go harvest, we make sure that at least we use a circular economy. The waste will be generated into a secondary resource which can also be used again, and in doing so, we won't endanger the resources of the respondent. So a respondent indicated we do not efficiently manage our resources, and quickly we go harvest more because it is in abundance. We overexploit our resources and use them inefficiently. Green economy promises to address mismanaging and overharvesting of natural resource. Therefore, we want to transition. And then the sector-specific drivers to that the respondent indicated include these 2, but because of time, I can't mention all, but I'll be explaining only these 2. They are, for instance, the agricultural sector, which was one of the sectors that were studied, indicated that they would like to transition because of the current system of agriculture is so complex. And then the utilization of agrochemicals, they do abuse agrochemicals when it comes to farming, which has implications on our health. Like those who finally be consumers of those products that they will come out with. And so because of that, green economy practices, some safe farming practices like the climate smart cocoa, which is more organic and then environmentally sustainable. So the agricultural sector would want to transition to adapt to some of these, better farming practices. And then
Scholastica, very briefly, it's already 8 minutes, so if you could wrap up.
Okay. Thank you. So basically, the conclusion. So in terms of the implication of the study, we realize that we don't have a national policy, like Ghana doesn't have a national policy framework driving the green economy transition. And so the study recommended that the National Development Planning Commission, which is the NDPC, should develop a policy framework nationally for the 5 sectors to also base on to develop their policies to drive the transition. And then in terms of practice, the study provided relevant qualitative data to inform practitioners' activities as far as the environment is concerned. I'm so grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for this great study, Scholastica. Again, everybody, please post your questions in the chat. In the meantime, my question to you, Scholastica, would be, you've talked a lot about the drivers of green economy. Where do you think what are the most relevant barriers right now that need to be overcome in Ghana to move towards green economy?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, to me, the most significant or the major barrier as far as this green transition is concerned is the political will, because we need the politicians on board. It's all about policies. They formulating policies, green policies to help with the transition. But we are not getting the politicians on board. So the political will is a major concern. And the other one is the national policy, which I just mentioned. So if we have a national policy that is driving the whole country, it means that all other sectors, like the economic sectors that are actually major contributors to emission, will base on that national policy framework to also develop their policies in order to direct their economic activities for a successful transition. Anyway, we have the NDPC document too, but we hope that these 2 major, and apart from that, the next one too is funding, because we know like green technologies are very expensive in terms of expertise too. We don't have much of green experts in our country. So funding too is also a major problem aside the political will and the national policy framework. Thank you.
Jan, you're on mute.
So please continue to post your questions in the chat. Scholastica will be able to answer them in the live Q&A as the next presentation is already coming up. So let's give a big hand to Scholastica and move towards the next presentation, part 2 of Denise Thomson. It's my great pleasure, Denise, to give the floor to you again.
Wonderful. Well, hello again, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to round out this series of excellent presentations. Thanks very much to my fellow presenters for doing such a great job. So just while Carrie brings up my slides, so Carrie, this is the slide deck marked EnviroScan, so it'll just take a moment. I'll say that for this presentation is based on work that I am doing for my PhD, which I'm doing at the University of Alberta in Canada, studying how Canadian health systems can respond to the health impacts of climate change. And in my work, I've been in this project. Oh, my slides disappeared again. There they are. Thank you. In this work, I've been supported by 2 very kind and generous members of the Cochrane Climate Health Working Group who have really been fantastic to work with. So that's Richard Webster and Neil Hadaway. The next slide, please. I don't know how much any of you happen to know about Canadian health systems. Probably not very much. I will say that, I mean, I could spend my entire presentation just explaining the intricacies of our somewhat bizarre setup for the delivery of public health and healthcare in this country. But the important things to know is first of all, that Canada is a really big country. And we have, so the breadth of systems is correspondingly large. We have 14 systems. Most healthcare policymaking is done at the level of provinces and territories. And although within each of those provinces and territories, each province or territory is responsible for the same type of work, the actual organization for delivery of that work is hugely different in each place. So that has, for my PhD dissertation, because I want to understand policymaking relevant to climate change in each of those places, I first have to understand that variation in governance structures and so on, in order to be able to dig into decision making and how that varies by level, system level, and also by location, geographic location. So that's a big task. So what I'm talking about here is one of my first steps in understanding that breadth. So what my aim was to study the work underway across a wide and very, very, as I've mentioned, heterogeneous set of systems. So that means I have a lot of data to collect and review. And so that obviously calls for a type of evidence synthesis. So I'll talk in the next slide, please, Carrie, about my decisions around that. So I chose a form of data synthesis or evidence synthesis called environmental scanning. And so that is an approach to collecting and collating large amounts of data. So the term environmental scanning has been around for a long time, and it's a term people use pretty informally. You're at work and you get told to go do an environmental scan of your competitors to see what they're doing. But the way I'm using it in this presentation is a more precise way. And it's a more precise way that's being used increasingly in healthcare research, health systems research. And Charlton et al., a Canadian group, published a scoping review last year looking at some recent environmental scans that have been done on health system topics. And they found that scanning has been used for one or both of the following reasons: to either examine the current state of programs, services, or policies, or to identify needs, strengths, or challenges, barriers, and service gaps in patient needs, in the area of patient needs or communication, community or organizational needs. The methods are still underdeveloped, so there isn't the rigorous and comprehensive methods guidance that you would get, for example, if you were doing a systematic review. But the steps that are emerging are what you would expect for a form of evidence synthesis, based on formulating a transparent and reproducible search strategy, conducting searching, screening, and inclusion and exclusion work according to predefined criteria, the systematized data extraction, and then thematic analysis of findings. So next slide, please. Great, thank you. So my main source of data for this environmental scan was organizational websites, which I recognize is a source of data with limitations, but again, when you look back at the breadth of what I'm trying to cover, it's a good entry point. So what I did is researched the URLs for health ministries, health authorities, large community and acute care hospitals across the country. So not every hospital by any means, because that's about 2,000 places just in their own, but the largest ones, and then all pediatric hospitals, which I believe was 14 sites. And then I've got a note here that after deduping, that was 1,879 separate URLs. And the reason there was duplications is because, again, referring back to that variation I mentioned of organization depending on different areas. In some places, a hospital would have its own website, and in some places it's folded into a larger organization. So then Neil Hadaway, one of my collaborators, developed an app using our software, a Shiny app, which I used to comb through those websites. And I used 4 search terms, but it became 8 searches because I used those searches in both English and French, by which I mean I searched those websites for the term climate change, but also for the term changement climatique, because Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. A logistical impediment that came up from the first round of searching using Neil's app in April, when I tried to redo the searches in September, was that Google had made changes set up explicitly to block web scraping work such as mine. I guess even though my intentions are pure, other people doing web scraping maybe are not so benevolent. So the searches trying to block bots and so on also blocked me. So I had to pay for a customized routine in a service called Data Miner to amplify the searches that Neil's app enabled me to do. So I flag that as an example of how research takes unexpected twists and turns along the way. Next slide, please. So the result of all that searching was very helpful data for me on what I found on the websites were what I categorized according to things starting with the letter P. So that's positions, by which I mean actual jobs that people hold in organizations, organizational policies that were related to climate change adaptation or mitigation, programs that they were running, products for the public, by which I mean information leaflets or infographics helping people public awareness about the impacts of climate change on health in their region, and then products supporting policymaking, such as vulnerability assessments.
Denise,
so
could you wrap up? Could
yes,
you start
yeah,
wrapping up?
Yes, last slide. If you, sorry, Carrie, I just meant that was my last substantive slide. If you can go back. Perfect, thank you. So this gave me a large amount of data, which will support my further analysis of climate change work going on across the country. The value of this was tremendous efficiency of time. Obviously, searching almost 2,000 websites with 8 terms manually would have been a huge amount of time. And also, I discovered when I tried doing manual searches just out of interest, the app actually found more than the manual searching did anyway. So this was that's the project, I guess. So last slide, please, Carrie. And that's just my contact information. Again, if you have any questions for me later about this work, please don't hesitate to get in touch. That's right. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Denise, for this wonderful presentation. It's really very interesting, this environmental scanning approach we are also working on something similar in a different space. Unfortunately, we are running really short of time. So if you have any questions, I encourage you now to send an email to Denise. I would like to wrap this session up. Thank all the presenters. I think this was a really, really good session. Just to encourage anybody listening to join our efforts in the coordinating group of climate solutions. We are always very keen to get submissions to the Wiley Systematic Reviews journal. So feel free to get in touch, and maybe last thing to highlight, the collaborating group on climate solutions is organizing a large summit next year in Berlin, the What Works Summit on climate solutions. So yeah, thanks for coming, for joining the session, and yeah, have a good afternoon.